Well, it's 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Viviana Hoyos. I am the ADP GLC. So welcome to Financial Aid Night. And thank you for joining us. Corla, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Corla Schultz. I'm the class of 2022 GLC. So all seniors out there, we're excited about tonight.
Hi, Ken McDill, senior class. This is an exciting night. We get to see where the money is going to come from for our hopes and dreams. So it's awesome.
I'm Ethan Doran, another GLC on campus, mostly doing tech tonight, but helping out for any of the senior class that needs help. And then we'd like to introduce Rudy Sanchez. He's going to be sharing with us some financial aid information. He works over at Mount SAC, if I'm not mistaken. He's the expert. So, all of us GLCs, we have some base knowledge, but he's going to, he's the expert when it comes to financial aid. And so he'll have a lot of information to share with us, guys. So we'll have a kind of a question forum at the end. So obviously kind of hold on to those questions. Hopefully a lot of those are going to be answered. And then obviously we're recording this as well. So we'll be able to send this out to you guys. So if you have questions in the future or anything like that, you'll be able to reference back to this, any chance that you need to. So without further ado, Mr. Rudy Sanchez.
Thank you, everyone. Wonderful to join you all. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. As mentioned, I'm Rudy Sanchez. I do work just down the street at Mount San Antonio College. I'm a financial aid specialist there. I've had the opportunity to work in the financial aid office for, work in financial aid for about 8 years. I worked at some private colleges, and now I'm here in the community college system. And it's always good. So thank you for setting aside the time, making the effort to join us today. We have tons of very useful information to cover. I know that there's probably a lot of other competing things going on generally. I hear football starting, dinner kind of sounds nice. Maybe you've had dinner already. But yes, glad that you're here and that we have the opportunity to learn more about what financial aid is. As someone mentioned earlier, where the money comes from, right? So we'll look at all of that together. It's my understanding that we are scheduled to meet until 8 p.m. So I'll try to break this up into a sort of two-part workshop. Initially, we'll cover some of the practical pieces of what financial aid is, how to apply, what options there are, et cetera. We'll cover that within an hour. And we have a slide prepared that we can walk through and we'll learn together. And then during that second hour between 7 to 8, we'll have some Q&A. So feel free to use the chat box. I think you should have that feature to submit your questions. And I'm more than happy to answer those questions at that time. So what I'll do, I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then we'll begin our presentation together. All right. So hopefully you all can see. I'll wait for some nods, some thumbs up. There we go. Good. So today we're going to cover some important basics. We have a lot of valuable material to review, and I do want to, of course, commend and thank Walnut High School for making this opportunity available. I know, just speaking briefly, my own personal experience, I did not have this opportunity to start thinking through how am I going to pay for college when I was a graduating high school senior. So this very much was kind of a mystery to me. I had no clue what I was getting into. I just sort of hoped for the best, and it was a bit of a learning curve and scramble a few weeks before moving in and doing the college thing. So this is a wonderful opportunity that Walnut High School is making available to you. So hopefully you can start beginning those conversations, right, and thinking through, okay, what options do I have? What is this going to mean for myself, for my family? So I'm happy students and parents and guardians of students that you all are here and have this opportunity. So let's take a look at what we're going to cover today. As you can see, we have quite a range of items, topics that we're going to discuss. We'll get started looking at a basic definition of financial aid. What is financial aid? What does it mean when we use that term? We'll then take a look at the different types of financial aid available. Once we have that understanding what financial aid is, what options there are, we'll talk about how you can apply for those financial aid options. We will then talk about some common mistakes that you really want to avoid, especially when completing the financial aid application. So we'll take a look at a few of those common mistakes. Next, we'll discuss something called the expected family contribution. We'll talk about what that is, why it's important. We'll then get into something called the student aid report. We'll talk about what that is, the student aid report, why this is a useful resource for you, especially after you complete your financial aid application. And we'll conclude our time with a really high-level overview of what to expect next. After you submit your application, more or less, what does the process look like? And we'll explore that together once we get there. And throughout our presentation, we have a bit of a segment called Mounting Myths. All right, working in the financial aid office, sometimes we hear assumptions about financial aid from students or from families that simply aren't true. Okay, so think of this as a sort of separating fact from fiction, a mythbusters of sorts. And so we'll cover some of those myths, and that'll help us think more clearly and accurately about financial aid. Once again, as questions come up, feel free to submit those through the chat box. I'll make sure to circle back to those and answer all of those questions during our Q&A time. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll begin with our first topic of discussion. What is financial aid? Put simply, financial aid is money to help you pay for college. That's really what it boils down to. Financial aid can help you cover a portion or maybe all of your college costs. As you go to school and continue with your learning, you will experience that going to college will have costs. There are expenses that you will need to pay for. You'll have to consider the cost of your textbooks, of your school supplies. You are charged for taking classes. That's known as tuition or a course enrollment fee. And depending on your housing situation, you might be paying for on-campus housing, right? Student dormitories, or you might be paying for a meal plan. Or maybe if you have your own apartment, you're renting a room, you'll have to think about rent and groceries, etc. So there are those different costs, those different expenses that you will have to plan on paying toward. Now, the good news is that there is money out there to help you with those costs. Financial aid can help you pay for those expenses during your time in college. And that money to help you pay for college will come from different sources, from different areas. There's money offered from the federal government. There's also money offered from the state of California. There is even financial aid money which is made available to you from the colleges themselves. This is known as institutional financial aid. It's very common that schools, whether that's a UC school, a Cal State, community colleges, or even a private school such as USC, Chapman, etc., they will have their own pool of funds, their own financial aid resources that they can make available to qualifying students. Finally, financial aid can even come from private sources. All right, as a private source, think about nonprofit organizations. Think about any conceivable business out there. Really, a private source would be an entity that's not affiliated with the college or with the federal or state government. So that's quite a diverse array of options right there. Potentially your employer, you as the student, or your parents. So there could be even financial aid coming from these different private sources. So now that we understand what financial aid is, we're just talking about money to help you pay for college. Let's now look at the types of financial aid available. Generally speaking, you can categorize financial aid into the following three categories. First of all, there is free money. So there is money which is free, which typically doesn't get paid back. And think of this as gift aid. It's gifted to you because you qualify. Examples of free financial aid money are scholarships and grants. Both scholarships and grants are available to those who qualify. And this doesn't typically require that you're having to pay this money back. With scholarships, often that's going to be through your own merit, whether that's your academic performance in high school or potentially based on your skills or your giftedness in things like athletics or music or debate, right? Things like that. And grants are usually going to be in the form of that there's a needs-based assessment. So schools, colleges, they just have to confirm if you meet income qualifications for grants. That's typically what you see. But once again, scholarships and grants, these are free types of financial aid. This is gift aid. And naturally, you really want to maximize how much of this free money you're going to receive. In addition to free money, there is a type of financial aid known as earned money, and this is money you are earning through employment. There is a work obligation. An example of this type of financial aid is the Federal Work-Study Program. The Federal Work-Study Program is a type of financial aid, and this comes from the federal government. And students who qualify have the opportunity to obtain a part-time job. So this is student employment. You're applying for a job, and if you get that job, then you are fulfilling your work obligation, right? Your job responsibilities, and you're earning a paycheck. That paycheck is actually funded from this type of financial aid program. So there could be a lot of great benefits and experiences which come from this work study opportunity. So even now, start considering whether you're interested in possibly working part-time as a student. With the federal work study program, it usually is the case that it's easier to obtain a job on campus, and you can find yourself working alongside professionals, whether those are staff members at the school or helping instructors with their research. There could be a lot of really great benefits, and you're starting to gain that valuable work experience if you haven't already done so. Finally, there's a type of financial aid known as borrowed money. All right, so this is money which you are borrowing and you will have to pay back. Repayment is required. And of course, borrowed money is in the form of loans. Now, remember, financial aid, this is just money to help you pay for college, right? And loans are indeed money that you can use to pay towards your expenses. So consider that this is still financial aid. Of course, since this does require repayment, you really want to exercise caution, have a lot of discretion before choosing to take out a loan, because there are very real and tangible repayment implications once you do enter repayment. And we'll look at further details about all of these different types of financial aid shortly. So once again, we're looking at 3 types of financial aid. You have your free money, your earned money, and your borrowed money. So let's now explore each of these different types in some more detail. So let's start off with the grants, the free money. As you'll see, there are quite an array of grant opportunities made available to college students. Now, don't feel like you have to memorize all of these, though I will say this is a great point to snap a picture, capture a screenshot, right? Just for future reference. But what you see right here are an example of the grants made available from the federal and state government. This is not at all exhaustive, but these really are the main grant opportunities which students are considered for from both the federal and state government. First of all, the federal government makes available a grant known as the Pell Grant. The maximum available for one school year is going to be $6,495. So the amount that you receive is going to depend on a few different pieces of information, but you could find yourself qualifying for up to that $6,495 amount. And it is worth noting, what we're seeing here are maximums for one school year. So you can, with financial aid, as we'll learn, you want to apply every year. And so it is possible that for future years, you could still qualify for these grant opportunities. But at most, you're looking at these amounts for one school year. In addition to the federal Pell Grant, the federal government makes available the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, known as FSCOG, and that could bring you upwards another $4,000. Once again, it's going to depend on a few factors in terms of how much you qualify for ultimately, but the federal government does have these 2 grant opportunities made available to qualifying students. The state of California does have a few grant options as well. Now, unique to the California community colleges is a grant opportunity known as the California College Promise Grant, or CCPG. Now, this type of financial aid will actually pay for your classes, for tuition. Students who qualify for CCPG don't have to worry about the course enrollment fee, the tuition cost. The cost just gets paid for by this program, whether you're taking 1 class or 5, 6, your tuition's covered. So this is a great resource for students. On top of that, the state of California does offer a financial aid program known as the Cal Grant. The Cal Grant is available for qualifying students. You could find yourself receiving upwards about $14,000 in this grant opportunity. And on top of that, the state of California also offers the middle class scholarship. The middle class scholarship is intended for those families whose income or assets exceeds the limits or the ceiling for Pell Grant. So these are going to be families who have an adjusted gross income of perhaps around 180, maybe even 190, but this could still assist with alleviating the cost of fees of tuition, particularly at a CSU or a UC school. Finally, the state of California has a grant known as the Student Success Completion Grant. Once again, this is unique to the California community colleges. But students who are full-time, who are receiving Pell Grant, could find themselves qualifying for up to $4,000 in the Student Success Completion Grant. So as you can see, there are some benefits to going to a community college. It is a low-cost option, and you could find yourself qualifying for some unique programs only available here at the community colleges. I do want to add that it is possible for students to qualify for multiple of these grant opportunities. So you might find yourself having access to various of these grants, and that could really help cover a portion or maybe even all of your expenses once you are enrolled. Let's now take a look at some scholarship information. Generally speaking, with scholarships, and what we're going to focus on are institutional scholarships, so money which the colleges make available. But generally, you're going to find, and you'll learn, that each college are going to have their own unique requirements, right, for their institutional scholarships that they might make available for you. What I'm going to cover briefly and focus on are the scholarships that Mount SAC will make available to our students. Here at Mount SAC, we do have quite a robust scholarship program. Over $400,000 in scholarships are awarded to our students. On average, if you're getting a scholarship here at Mount SAC, you could receive between $500 to $1,000. So we really are proud of that fact that we have so many resources available to our students. We also partner with the Associated Student Body, and we have a book scholarship. So we even have assistance with textbook purchases. Students who can apply to our book scholarship, there's no essay required, and you could find yourself getting up to $250 in a book voucher. On top of that, our scholarship office does work closely with our students to help them apply to very competitive and national scholarships, such as the Jack Kent Cooke Transfer Scholarship. We did recently have a student awarded, and this is a life-changing scholarship. You could receive upwards $40,000 a year, and sometimes this can even go with you towards your graduate level of study, whether you're pursuing a master's or doctoral program. This is a scholarship awarded to students who have high academic achievements, demonstrate leadership skills, and also show some financial need. But once again, our scholarship team really works closely and offers a variety of workshops and advisement opportunities to help you develop your scholarship applications. Finally, I do want to recommend the benefits of outside scholarship opportunities. There are a lot of useful websites out there. Particularly, we like the following websites: fastweb.com, College Board, Unigo. These are large scholarship databases that will house hundreds, if not thousands, of scholarship opportunities. When we're talking about outside scholarships, we're talking about scholarship money which is available from different organizations, businesses. You'd be surprised at everything that's out there. And with these scholarship opportunities, there's quite a variety of requirements. Some of these scholarships will require that maybe you write an essay, maybe you'll have to provide some letters of recommendations, but some of these scholarship opportunities ask that you produce some music, or that you record perhaps like a commercial for their company, or like you can use your talents, right? So things get pretty creative, pretty unique. So I'd encourage you, start looking into that. With these scholarship opportunities, you can apply throughout the year. There are even scholarships that you can start applying to now. You don't have to wait until you're enrolled as a college student. You don't have to wait until you start your classes or anything like that. You can apply throughout the year, whenever. So really try to take advantage of that. If you find yourself qualifying for some of these outside scholarships here and there throughout the school year, that's just more money that will make its way to help cover your costs, or maybe reimburse you depending on when you receive these opportunities. So set a realistic goal. Try to set aside that time, apply to a few scholarships each month, and you never know, you might find yourself qualifying for some of these scholarship opportunities. Just a few more things worth noting about scholarships. Really consider your network, your community. Where are you involved? Does your high school have scholarship options? Maybe your employer, maybe your parents' employer. has some scholarship opportunities or tuition assistance programs. If you're part of religious or city organizations, maybe there are scholarship opportunities or there are connections there, right, to really help you access those resources. Consider what makes you who you are, what makes you unique or who you are, right? So consider your major, your career goals. What are your ambitions? What are you interested in studying? What are your hobbies? What's your background, your ethnicity? Maybe even your medical condition. There are scholarships that are really targeted toward specific types of students, and you might find that there are scholarships there that are really tailored to who you are, and that could really give you an advantage in terms of applying for these scholarships and ultimately having them awarded to you. And of course, just a little disclaimer, you really want to be cautious of scams. When you're applying for scholarships, you shouldn't be having to provide sensitive information like your social security number, credit card information, your Venmo account, things like that. So if you don't feel comfortable providing your information, then don't provide it. Don't provide it, but just be on the lookout. Those scams are out there. So just try to have that vigilance about what information you're providing. So now that we've covered the free money, we've spent some time talking about the grant opportunities and about scholarship opportunities. Let's now talk about the next type of financial aid, which is earned money. Specifically, we're talking about the Federal Work-Study Program. Remember, Federal Work-Study is earned money. You're earning your financial aid through a work obligation. For the Federal Work-Study Program, this does require that you apply through the Fafsa application, and we'll talk about the financial aid applications here in a few moments. But a Fafsa is required. In order to qualify for federal work study, there is an income factor to it. So it is a need-based award. This is captured by your FAFSA. So as long as you're completing the FAFSA, the school will determine if you qualify. And as a reminder, this is money you're earning as a paycheck. If for whatever reason you don't qualify for federal work study, for the federal work study program, I'd still encourage you, consider working on campus. Colleges often will have student employment opportunities, and there could be a lot of benefits to working on campus. For one, that's just kind of convenient, right? If you're already there taking classes, hopefully it's going to be a bit easier to then start your workday there. And if you're working on campus, you're going to be very involved in participating in the life and in the life of the campus. So that really could just help you make the most of your time there. And of course, you're gaining that work experience and you're earning that paycheck to help you with your different school expenses. So start thinking through whether this will make sense for you when you start your college going experience. So let's now talk about the last type of financial aid. We're going to talk about borrowed money. Remember, these are loans. So borrowed money does eventually require repayment. We're going to first talk about the loans which a student can choose to take out. So there are two types of loans available for students. There is what's called a subsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan, and we'll talk about the differences shortly. With a loan, remember, this is borrowed money. You have to repay it, so this is a serious obligation. Now, I do want to share that colleges, they cannot force you to take out these loans, all right? When you apply for financial aid, that's not the same as you signing up to take out a loan. If you apply through the FAFSA application, for example, you're not saying, okay, sign me up, I'm ready to take out a loan. You're not committing to anything yet. You actually have to complete some additional steps before you can receive your loan money. These steps would include entrance counseling and a master promissory note. The entrance counseling, this is going to be an online tutorial. It's like a self-paced module in which you're learning more about the terms and conditions of the loan. And there's even a very useful repayment tool. This repayment tool allows you to play with the numbers. You can estimate how much in a loan you might receive, and then you're shown what that means in terms of repayment, a monthly repayment amount. This is going to really help you better understand what borrowing a loan could mean for you, and you don't have to feel like you're in the dark, like you have no idea what you're getting into when or if you take out a loan. Finally, the master promissory note, this is your signature to the terms and conditions of the loan. So this is the legally binding document of the loan, so you have to sign off on that document before you can actually receive this loan money. Let's talk about the difference between the subsidized and the unsubsidized loan. The subsidized loan, the subsidized federal loan, is going to be available to those who show financial need. So this is a need-based loan. This is captured based on what's on your FAFSA. And the subsidized loan does not accrue interest. So this is the main benefit to the subsidized loan program. There's no interest accrual when you receive that loan. As long as you remain enrolled at least half time, then interest will not accrue over the time that you're enrolled in school. Interest will only begin to accrue once you enter repayment. Repayment for these federal student loans will begin 6 months after you are no longer enrolled as a half-time student. So whether that means you just stop showing up and you're done with your program, you graduate, or you just need a break, or maybe you're enrolled less than half time, but you have that what's called a 6-month grace period, and then you enter repayment. Let's talk about the unsubsidized loan. The unsubsidized loan is completely different from the subsidized loan. The unsubsidized loan is not at all need-based. You could be a millionaire, you can have all this money and still receive an unsubsidized loan. Income is not a factor for that. And the unsubsidized loan will accrue interest. As soon as you receive that money, interest does begin to accrue. As long as you're enrolled half-time, you're not required to make interest payments or pay anything toward those federal student loans. You're more than welcome to. You can if you want to, but you're not required. Be cautious though. If you do have an unsubsidized loan, interest will accrue, and that could definitely add up over the course of 4, 5, 6 years, however long it takes for you to finish your program, for example. So these are the loans available to you as a student. If you're applying through the FAFSA application, it's usually the case that colleges, they will automatically offer you the loans. So you'll see how much in loans you could receive, but it is ultimately up to you to indicate if you want the entire amount or perhaps a reduced amount, or if you're just not interested, you can just decline the offer altogether. Now, for students who are applying through the DREAM Act application, there is a DREAM loan available. The DREAM loan is only in the form of a subsidized loan, and the steps involved are very similar. You have to apply through the DREAM Act application. It's still a loan, you have to repay it, but you will have to complete steps like entrance counseling, a master promissory note. And the benefit to this DREAM loan is that this is a subsidized loan, so there's no interest accrual, similar to what we already talked about. But I do want to share that just in the event that we have students who are going to apply for financial aid through the DREAM Act application. Aside from the student loans that we've spoken about, I do want to briefly cover what's called a Parent Plus loan. Parents of dependent students can receive and apply for a federal loan known as the Parent Plus loan. So let's talk about the steps involved. Parents, if you want to pursue this option as a way to pay for your child's education, to finance their education, then the Parent Plus loan could be a way, right, to do just that. The steps to apply for a Parent Plus loan are as follows. First of all, the student needs to apply through the FAFSA. So students, you have to apply through the FAFSA before a Parent Plus loan is even an option. But once you've applied through the FAFSA application, parents, you can apply for the Plus loan online. Some schools have their own application that they want you to complete, but a lot of schools just use the online federal Plus loan application. There is a credit check involved, so just keep in mind your credit history is a factor. If you have an adverse credit history, then it's possible to get denied. Before you can receive this Plus loan, parents, you do need to sign off on the master promissory note, so that is one of the components involved. If for whatever reason, if you're not approved for the Plus loan, you do have some options. So you could, parents, you could still reapply for the Plus loan with a co-signer. It is possible to appeal the credit decision if you think there was some faulty review from your credit history, or you're kind of working on repairing that. You could appeal that credit decision. Or if you're denied the Plus loan, then it is possible that the student could receive an additional amount of federal loans. The additional amount is going to be an unsubsidized loan, however, so just keep that in mind, but it could open up an opportunity to receive additional loans for the student. Okay, so we've now covered those different types of financial aid. I know we've already covered quite a bit. We looked at the grants, scholarships, federal work study, and loans in terms of the different options out there. Let's now sort of take a breather, right? This is kind of time to, all right, shift gears a bit. Let's cover our first Mountie myth. Once again, we tend to hear things in the financial aid office that oftentimes are untrue. And here's one of those assumptions that we come across. Students or families, they assume that their income is too high, and because of that, they're just not going to receive any grants or scholarships. And this is false. As we discussed, not all financial aid is based on income. Some financial aid options don't even look at your income. Income is not a factor. For example, scholarships or that unsubsidized loan that we talked about. And believe it or not, higher income students might still qualify for need-based financial aid. There are a lot of factors involved when determining what options you do qualify to receive. So what you want to do, you want to apply. It's still worth applying. Applying is 100% free, and that's the best way to see what options you have available. So now let's talk about applying. Now that we've talked about what financial aid is, what options there are, let's talk about how you can apply for those financial aid opportunities. All students should work on completing one of the following applications. You're either going to complete the Fafsa application, which is the free application for federal student aid, or you're going to complete the California Dream Act application. One of these applications is right for you, and you want to work on completing these applications every year that you're going to continue with your learning in college, apply, and hopefully you continue to qualify for financial aid each year that you're enrolled. So let's talk about what application is right for you, which one you should be completing. We'll start with the Fafsa first. The Fafsa application, the free application for federal student aid, is your application if any of the following apply to you. If you are a US citizen, or if you're considered an eligible non-citizen, and that's the language used on the Fafsa application. Examples of an eligible non-citizen are those who are permanent residents, those who were granted a refugee or asylee status, maybe you're a T visa holder. There are a few other very specific statuses that would qualify you to complete the Fafsa, and I'd recommend go to the Fafsa website. You'll see the Fafsa website on that top red banner. If you go to the Fafsa website, you can also just look to confirm that this is your application. There is a very important deadline of March 2nd. You really want to apply by March 2nd every year. If you miss this deadline, then you are likely limiting your state financial aid opportunities. Okay, so really do what you can. Set that reminder, set those notifications, make sure to apply by March 2nd. If you happen to miss this deadline, you know, it happens, life happens. If you miss this deadline, still apply. You might still qualify for federal options and maybe some state options, but you could really be limited at that point. So do your best, meet that March 2nd deadline. And you also want to include any school, any college that you think is an option for you, include them on your application. If you don't include the school, the college on your application, then they won't ever get a copy of your financial aid application. They won't know you're interested in financial aid. So it's very important that you include schools on your application. You'll see our school code, Mount SAC school code, is on there. On the Fafsa, there is a feature where you can search for the schools, so you can just search for them and add them accordingly. But make sure to include any school that you're interested in onto your application. In order to work on the Fafsa application, students, you will need to create what's called an FSA ID, the Federal Student Aid ID. So what is the Federal Student Aid ID? It's basically a username and a password. It's an online username that you're going to use, and this is going to belong to you. So you're going to think of it like your online account for Fafsa. So you're going to use this every year in order to log in and complete your application. This is also how the federal government, how they authenticate your identity. So they want to confirm that it's you, not someone pretending to be you, impersonating you. So it's going to be the way that they authenticate your identity. And this is also how you electronically sign the application. If you haven't done so, sign up for your Federal Student Aid ID. You can do this now. You don't have to wait until you're ready to apply for FAFSA. You can just take care of this. It's just one less thing for you to do. So how do you create the Federal Student Aid ID? You'll want to go to the website, fsaid.ed.gov. You'll see it on the slide there. And you'll create your account. Setting up that online account, it's pretty straightforward. It's like any other online account, Netflix, Amazon, Discord, Reddit, you know who you are. So go through those steps, fsaid.ed.gov. You'll create your own username, password, etc. And that's going to be how you log into your FAFSA. Now, keep in mind that a social security number is required. So make sure to have that available. You really want to make sure you're entering the right number. You're entering your name exactly as it appears on that social security card. Parents, you also have a role on the FAFSA application. One of the important things you have to do, if your information is required on the FAFSA, then you have to sign off on that FAFSA. Hopefully you're able to create that Federal Student Aid ID. That's really the easiest way to sign off on the FAFSA. The Federal Student Aid ID, once again, this is an electronic signature. So it's just easier to provide that signature electronically than having to manually sign off on the FAFSA and mail it out. So parents, you can also go to the fsaid.ed.gov website. You can create your own username and password. So you're going to have your own separate ID. Parents will have their own separate username and password. Students will have their own separate username and password. But parents, you'll create that ID. You do need a social security number in order to create that FSA ID. If you don't have a social security number, that's not a problem. Then on the FAFSA, what will happen is you'll just print off the signature page. Parents, you'll manually sign that signature page and you'll mail it to the address indicated on that signature page. So let's now talk about the DREAM Act applications. We've covered the eligibility requirements in order to finish that FAFSA application. If that didn't seem to fit your situation, if you're not a US citizen or if you don't qualify as an eligible non-citizen, then I'd encourage you consider the DREAM Act application. The DREAM Act application is your application if any of the following apply. If you are undocumented, or maybe you have a valid or expired DACA, or maybe you have a U visa, or you have temporary protected status, if any of those apply, and if you're otherwise a California resident, you meet AB 540 requirements and meet the academic qualifications. For example, you're graduating high school, then DREAM Act is your application. You can always go to the DREAM Act website. You'll see that on the red banner, dream.csac.ca.gov. And as you start that application, you'll be presented with a series of questions you can answer in order to confirm this is your application. Similar to FAFSA, this is how you apply for financial aid. If DREAM Act is your application, then you're applying for state financial aid opportunities. Similar to FAFSA, you want to apply by March 2nd. This is very important. Try not to miss this deadline. If you miss it, still apply. You might qualify for some options. However, you might be limited. And similar to FAFSA, you want to include colleges on your DREAM Act application. Our school code is there on the screen. If you forget our school code, or if you don't know the school code for the different colleges, you can always search for those colleges and include them accordingly. For the DREAM Act application, students, you will need to have a user ID, a username. So you'll still be creating that. This is how you're authenticating who you are. You as a student have your own unique user ID, your username and password, and this is how you electronically sign off on your DREAM Act application. So how do you create it? Well, you'll go to the DREAM Act website. You'll go to that DREAM Act website. You'll see there's a large start button, so you can start on that application, and part of that process involves you setting up your user ID. So you'll create that similar to the other online accounts out there, and that will be what you use every year to apply. Parents, you are also involved. If your student is completing the DREAM Act application, and if your signature is required, then you will create what's called a parent PIN number. The PIN number belongs to you. That's what you're using every year. And this is something you're going to create at the very end. At the very end of the application, there's prompting, there's messaging that will walk you through how to create this PIN number. But you'll set that up, and that's going to be how you sign off on this application. Now, for both FAFSA and DREAM Act applications, we encourage everyone to apply online. Yes, there is a PDF file available. You could print this out, do everything, by hand via paper and mail it out. And, if you want to, more power to you, go for it. But applying online is encouraged because processing is quicker. There's a lot of built-in help and guidance on the online application, and there's a lot of self-checks involved, right? There's rules and smart logic so that if you're maybe reporting something in error, you're going to see an alert message, right? So it kind of helps protect you from you if you're inputting something incorrect. So that's one of the features to the online application. Try to do that online if you can. For the FAFSA, there's also a mobile application if you have an iOS device or an Android device, and there's the My Student Aid app, and you can also apply for the FAFSA through that mobile application. And once again, you want to apply every year. For financial aid, apply every year. That's so critical. October 1st of every year, so just a few weeks away, October 1st, the new application is made available, meaning that the 2022-23 application, which is what you need for next fall when you start college, if that's part of your plan, the 2022-23 application is available October 1st of this year. And that's when you want to apply. You want to apply by March 2nd, so you have about 5 months to take care of that. Let's talk about some of the documents that you want to have available in order to complete the 2022-23 FAFSA or DREAM Act application. As applicable, have your Social Security card to ensure that you're providing your social and your name exactly as it appears. If you're a permanent resident, have that permanent resident card available. The 2022-2023 FAFSA and DREAM Act application, this is going to ask you income and tax questions from 2020. So that's just part of the application. That's how the government has decided to assess, to evaluate your ability to pay towards your education. They're going to look at income from 2020. So if you as the student or if your parent filed taxes in 2020, make sure to have those income tax returns available. If you as the student or if you as the parent worked in 2020, make sure to have those 2020 W-2s available in order to report the income you earned from working. Or if you were self-employed, make sure to have maybe your Schedule C document or other records of the way that you're tracking your income, right? For some students and families, you might have to report specific types of assets, okay? And on the FAFSA and DREAM Act, there's some guidance built into that explains, that outlines what's considered an asset. But generally speaking, those who have to report their asset information, you're going to have to look at the amount that you have in a checking or savings account. If you have specific types of investments, you have to report the value of those investments. So just make sure when you're working on the application, make sure that you have access to this information, right? To these financial records. For some students and families, you have to report specific types of untaxed income. Once again, the FAFSA and DREAM Act will explain what is considered untaxed income. But this is going to be untaxed income from 2020. Examples would be amounts of child support received or untaxed portions of payments from retirement accounts, basically. So once again, just make sure you have these records available in the event you have to report this information. So let's talk about our second Mountie myth. Oftentimes we have a concern from students, a concern that because their parent or maybe both parents don't have a social security number, that they won't qualify for financial aid. And this is outright false. This is not true. Your eligibility to qualify for grants and scholarships is not at all based on your parents having a social security number. If that is your situation, if your parent or both parents don't have a social, then on the FAFSA or the DREAM Act, you'll just report all zeros for their social. You'll just put 0, 0, 0, etc. as their social security number, and you can still submit your application and still be considered for the different financial aid opportunities that we spoke about. So let's now talk about common mistakes to avoid. We've looked at how to apply. We looked at the FAFSA and the DREAM Act application, some of the documents that you want to have available. So let's now talk about some mistakes that you really want to avoid. As you're working on the financial aid application, you'll learn that there's all kinds of different questions, right? And it's worth noting that a lot of your answers, a lot of what you're reporting on that application is used in a calculation. So there's this complex calculation that takes place, and that is going to produce a score. And we'll talk more about what that score is. But that calculation is based on your responses, your self-reported responses, right? So it is so critical that you're reporting everything accurately so that your financial aid eligibility is properly assessed, properly evaluated. So let's look at these different mistakes that you want to avoid. So first of all, you want to avoid misreporting marital status. So both students and parents will see this question separately, but students and parents will have to report their marital status as of the date that you are going to submit, that you're submitting the financial aid application. So keep that in mind. It's not your marital status based on your taxes from 2020. It's not your marital status based on what might happen a week later, right? It's whatever is true as of the date that you're working on that application. So please keep that in mind. Another common mistake is reporting the wrong parent, or maybe not know if you don't know which parent to report. Now, this is applicable for those students whose biological or adoptive parents are no longer married or no longer living together. So if that's you, if you as the student, if your biological parents or if your adoptive parents, if they're not married and they're not living together, then you need to report the parent that you've been living with the most during the past 12 months. So from whatever date that you're working on that financial aid application, if this is your situation, you have to consider, okay, which parent have you been living with the most over the last year? All right. And once you know which parent that is, if that parent remarried, you do have to report step parent information. So please keep that in mind. Let's look at our next common mistake that you want to avoid. So this one relates to income information. You want to avoid misreporting your income information. As we learned, the Fafsa, the Dream Act, will look at 2020 income and tax information. So make sure you're looking at your 2020 records, okay? Don't look at records from 2019 or records from what you think 2021 is going to look like for you. Look at your income, your tax information from 2020. And please keep in mind that both the students and parents are asked income and tax questions, okay? So there's a very specific section for parents and a very specific section for students. It does happen where we receive applications where the student and parent are making the same amount of money. There's that duplicative reporting, all right? So pay close attention. If you're in the student section and the questions are all using that language of student, then make sure it's the student answering those questions. And then when you're in that parent section, at that point, make sure it's the parent providing their information. Another common error is misreporting asset information. The assets, if you need to report your asset information, you're reporting the value of your assets as of the date that you're submitting your application. It's not the value of your assets based on last year, based on 2020, based on next quarter, or anything like that. It's the value of your assets as of that date that you're going to submit your application. So what that means is that, hey, if you want to pay down some of your bills, right, take care of all of that, before you submit the application, that's a good way to maybe try to lower the amount of assets that you have to report, right? So keep that in mind. Once again, the FAFSA, the Dream Act, will tell you what's considered an asset, but here's kind of just a sort of general explanation. So the amount of cash that you have on hand, the amount in your checking and savings account. There are specific types of investments. Do not report the value of your home if that's your principal place of residence. If you own another home, if you have multiple properties, then yeah, you might have to report that. If you'll have to report their net worth, right? If the difference between their value and the debts owed to that, right? If you actually have value from those properties. So don't report your main place of residence. And for the businesses, you have to report the net worth of businesses or an investment farm if you have more than 100 full-time employees. If you have a small business, if you don't have more than 100 full-time employees, then you don't have to report the value of your business or investment farm. Let's look at another common mistake to avoid. This is specific to students who are completing the FAFSA application. A common mistake is not taking advantage of the data retrieval tool. Many people can use this. So if you can, try to use the data retrieval tool. What this is, this tool will actually import. This will transfer tax information directly from the IRS database onto your FAFSA. So this is a great way to streamline your application because the tax questions are all answered, right? And this will help ensure accuracy of the information that you're reporting. So take advantage of the data retrieval tool if you can. Another mistake to avoid is not answering a question about Schedule 1. And so we'll try to work through this a little slowly because it's a little convoluted. But some students will be presented with a question about whether they, as the student or the parent, filed taxes using Schedule 1. All right. So for this question, if you see this question about if you filed taxes using Schedule 1, you can answer no to this question if you did not file Schedule 1. So that's kind of matter of fact, that's obvious, right? You can say no to this question if you didn't use IRS Schedule 1. Or you can answer no to this question if the only reason that you filed using IRS Schedule 1 is to report one or more of the following items: unemployment compensation, an educator expense, an IRA deduction, a student loan interest deduction, or an Alaska Permanent Fund dividend. So if that's the only reason that you had to use Schedule 1 is to report one of those items, then you can actually answer no to this question, all right? So please keep that in mind. Try to somehow file that in the back of your head. But but try to answer this accurately because that really could benefit you if you truly can answer no to this question. Our next common mistake is about misreporting household size. This one is very common. As you're working on the FAFSA and DREAM Act application, you will see a question, a section that talks about household size. Pay close attention to who can qualify, to the definition of who qualifies to be included in the household size. You want to include all persons that are primarily supported financially, who are financially dependent to your parent. If you're a dependent student, if you have parent information on your application, then include all persons like siblings or even other people, could be grandparents, cousins, etc., as long as they are truly financially dependent on your parents, and they will be between those dates. Okay, so just pay close attention. It's very common we get applications where students forget to include their siblings. You know, we don't delve into that family stuff going on if you forget your siblings, but, you know, don't forget people in the household size if they truly qualify. So just pay close attention to that. Another related mistake is misreporting the number in college. If you are a dependent student, meaning you have parent information on your application, you can't include your parent in that number in college. Unfortunately, parents are excluded, so you can't include them. But you can include other people who are in that household size. If they're going to be enrolled in college at least half time for 2022-23. So if they're enrolled, if they're pursuing a certificate, a degree program, make sure to include them. So yes, if you have maybe an older sibling, right, who's going to college and will be during that year, make sure to include them in the number in college. Another mistake that we tend to see is forgetting to add schools. Remember, if a school is not added on your application, then the school will never know that you're interested in financial aid. So make sure to include every possible option. By including schools on your FAFSA or DREAM Act, you're not committing to those schools. You're not telling them, hey, sign me up, I'm ready to pay, or you know, I'm committing to your school. You're just simply sending them your financial aid application, and schools will use that to determine what they can offer you, what options you're eligible to receive. On the FAFSA and DREAM Act, you can only include up to 10 schools. If you need to include more than 10 schools, you can always re-log in at a later date, and then you can remove some schools, add others, swap them out. So that could be how you include more than 10 schools if that's what you want to do. Finally, there is another common mistake, and that's about signatures. So sometimes students or parents forget to sign their FAFSA or DREAM Act. If you forget to sign your application, then your application is actually incomplete. And then we can't even use it to confirm what options you're eligible to receive. So make sure, students, that you're signing off on your FAFSA or DREAM Act, and then parents, make sure that if your signature is required, that you're signing off electronically or manually by hand, if that's how you need to sign. So let's now talk about the expected family contribution. I spoke about earlier a calculation which takes place from the application, and the calculation will produce this score, the expected family contribution score, also known as EFC. So this score is going to determine, this score is a large factor in terms of your financial aid eligibility. This will confirm what options you have available and how much. So this is calculated by the financial aid application. This score is not at all what you have to pay. So it's not going to be the bill that you're expected to pay, how much you need to put down before you can start your classes. It's simply an index number, a number that's going to be used to confirm the options available to you. And keep in mind too that this score could change. Remember, a financial aid is you're going to apply every year, and once you submit your application, sometimes colleges, schools, they need to confirm that the information on your application is accurate. There could be verification involved, and that could result in changes. So your score could change if there are any corrections made. Maybe the colleges, the schools, they have to correct the information because they're looking over your documents, or they have to verify some of that information. It's worth noting too that on the FAFSA, on the DREAM Act, you can always re-log in and correct information if something was incorrect. So if you just made an error, if something is outright incorrect, then you can re-log in and make corrections, and that could adjust the score. There is also something called an appeal, a financial aid appeal due to special circumstances, and that could result in your score changing, and we'll talk about that shortly. And then finally, when you're applying for financial aid, every year, the information on your application could change. The income and tax year will be different. So, right, you could have made more money or less money. Maybe your assets could change, right, in terms of what you're reporting. So your score could change subsequent years, and that could have implications in terms of what your options are each year that you're going to school. So once again, something else to keep in mind. So let's talk about special circumstances. So what are these? Students and parents can experience a variety of unique situations, whether they're personal or financial circumstances, that can really affect their ability to pay toward their education. And the Financial Aid Office understands this. And thankfully, most, if not all, schools will have a process, a procedure in which your unique circumstances can be reviewed. And potentially this could mean that your financial aid eligibility is increased. If you as the student or if your parent has experienced a drastic change in their personal or financial circumstances, then I would encourage you to work closely with the Financial Aid Office to see if there's any way that those circumstances can be considered for financial aid purposes. As we learned, the Fafsa the Dream Act, this is looking at information from 2020, right? So a lot happened that year, but a lot has been happening since then, right? So if you or your parent have experienced unemployment, reduced work hours, maybe there's been a separation or divorce, if there's been a circumstance that's just not captured based on your Fafsa or Dream Act, contact the Financial Aid Office. There could be something called a change of income or an appeal, a special circumstance. There's different names used, but there could be that process in which once again, your situation is looked at more closely, and that could mean that your application is updated to account for your circumstances. I do also want to share another type of special circumstance in the event it applies to you, or maybe it applies in the future. But for some students are just not able to provide their parent information based on their unique circumstances. They might not have contact with their parents. They can't provide their parents' information. So if that does happen, students, you can contact the Financial Aid Office and we can have that conversation. We can talk about whether you qualify for a change of dependency. And if you are approved for this, then your financial aid application doesn't require parent information, and we're able to move forward and consider you as independent for financial aid purposes. So please keep this in mind. Know that the Financial Aid Office, we can partner with you and walk you through these steps if you need to go through the change of income or change of dependency process. So let's now talk about the Student Aid Report. What is this? Why it's important? The Student Aid Report, the SAR, this is going to be available once you complete your application. Within 2 to 3 business days from completing the Fafsa and Dream Act, you'll have this report available, and this is going to summarize all of your responses. I recommend double check, triple check this report, okay? Make sure that what you reported is accurate. We all make mistakes, right? We all make mistakes, so double check for those errors. If you see anything that was reported which is outright incorrect, you can relog onto that Fafsa and Dream Act and make those corrections. On your report, you're also going to see your EFC score, your expected family contribution score. And you're also going to see some other information. So some comments that can help you better understand your eligibility, or if something's missing, if you're missing a signature, those comments will make it clear. So that's going to be very useful. If you're completing the Fafsa, then your student aid report will also provide you your history of financial aid. If you're receiving federal grants or federal loans, you're going to see a history of how much you've used. So that'll help you keep track, especially as you apply every year and continue with your college experience. So let's now talk about what to expect next. So we're going to cover our last topic of discussion. So once you submit your application, more or less what's going to take place. So this is a summary of the process. As we talked about, make sure that you're applying by March 2nd. So complete that Fafsa, that Dream Act by March 2nd. What you also want to ensure takes place is having your grade point average submitted. This is specific to Pell Grant eligibility requirements. But one of the requirements for Pell Grant is having a qualifying grade point average, and that needs to get sent to them by March 2nd. Now, some good news here. State law does mandate that public California high schools report grade point average information for their graduating high school seniors. So unless you opted out from this, this is probably already taking place automatically. If you want to double check though, feel free to double check, and I'm sure, I'm sure you'll just have peace of mind, right? Knowing that that's done, but you could always double check, but that does need to take place by March 2nd for Cal Grant purposes. As we talked about, your student aid report, this is going to be a useful document. So double check that a few days after you apply through the Fafsa or Dream Act. And eventually, you're going to have colleges reaching out to you. And this is where it really just depends in terms of the timeline as to when schools start to contact you. As a general rule, private schools are probably going to reach out to you much sooner. I worked at a private school where we were already communicating with students by Thanksgiving. You know, we tried to have information communicated by Thanksgiving so that, hey, you know, as you're together as a family, you know, you can talk about financing college. That's always an exciting topic of discussion. So private schools tend to reach out sooner compared to a UC or a Cal State, but either way, make sure you're double checking messages. Schools will start to communicate with you, whether you have more documents to submit, and they're going to notify you what your eligibility looks like through what's called a financial aid offer letter, or maybe a financial aid award or a package. So make sure to double check that from those schools that you plan to attend. If those colleges need more information from you, submit those as soon as possible, okay? Your eligibility is not finalized until you submit everything requested. If you want to make the best decision possible, then you probably want to have a good understanding of what your financial aid options are for all of these different schools, right? The earlier you have that information, the more time you have, right, to really assess things and evaluate things. So submit those documents as soon as you can. And then make sure to compare financial aid offers, awards, compare them across those different schools so that you have an understanding what you're eligible for at each school and what that means in terms of the true cost, right? How much you might have to pay out of pocket or how much you might have to take out in a loan in order to cover everything. So here's an example of how you can use information from a financial aid offer and then how you can develop a financial plan, right? How you can compare it to your costs. So what we have here is just an example of what a Mount SAC student might qualify for. So on the one hand, you have information from a financial aid offer. So for this student is here for fall and spring. So they're offered this money for one school year. They've applied for financial aid. They qualify for these grant options. And in our example, this student is getting about $10,000 of grant money. This is free money to help them during the fall and spring term. And as you compare that to the costs, right, you can look at the school's website, at their catalog, et cetera, and you can research what's the tuition cost, what are the other fees, and you can then compare that to the financial aid available. In our example, this student has about $9,000. The difference between financial aid grant money and their costs is about $9,000. And they have that available to cover textbooks between fall and spring, to cover school supplies. Financial aid can even assist towards personal expenses, laptop, internet service, right? Housing. So it definitely is advantageous and would be worthwhile to apply. You could find yourself in a similar situation where you have financial aid money to cover all of your costs, and you can even use that for your textbooks and other expenses. So let's cover our final Mountie myth before we conclude our time together. So something else we hear is this general notion, the sentiment, I can't apply, the application is just too difficult, I'm overwhelmed. And while we understand, we totally get it, we're happy to share that the Mount SAC Financial Aid Department, we have plenty of resources available and support options to help you throughout the application process. So we're happy to serve as a resource, not only to our students, but to the surrounding community. So you can give us a call, you can show up to our office. We're happy to help answer your financial aid questions. We have experts here that can answer those questions. And we have events like our Cash for College event. So our Cash for College event is a great opportunity to receive live assistance with your Fafsa and Dream Act application. So we do have the event scheduled for October 9th. This is going to be a virtual event, and we'll have a workshop where we literally go through the entire Fafsa, the entire Dream Act. We have a Q&A session as well, where you can ask your questions as you're working through your application. And you can also learn more about resources here at Mount SAC, scholarship resources, student support programs. If you think Mount SAC is going to be an option for you, then you can learn more about the amazing student programs here at Mount SAC. Our admissions department is part of this event as well. So it's going to be great. It's a free event, so you can register. I'd encourage all of you, if you're able to attend, show up and we can help you with your Fafsa and Dream Act. Mark it on your calendars. Saturday, October 9th. So Saturday, October 9th, we will have our Cash for College event. Registration is open. So you'll see at the bottom, you can go to our financial aid webpage, or for those of you on Instagram, we do have an Instagram account at @MountSAC_FA. the link in our bio will take you right to our registration webpage. So please register, 100% free. And yes, those of you, right, high school seniors, if you come to this event and if you finish your Fafsa or Dream Act, then you actually enter into a scholarship drawing. So you could find yourself getting some free money to help you for college. So register, show up, and we'll help you with your application. We're happy to do so. So that concludes our time together, at least the formal presentation, if you will. We're about 5 minutes over, but I'm glad that we are on schedule. Thank you once again for joining. I hope that you have a better understanding about the financial aid process, what it is, what options are out there, and some of those important things you can look at and that you can, the action you can take right after you apply in order to better understand your eligibility. If you do have any questions at this time, I'm happy to take those. I already see that the chat box, I see that little ticker of questions getting submitted. So I see those have been sent, but we have until
Rudy,
8 o'clock,
can I ask,
so I'm happy to answer those.
Can I ask a quick question, Rudy?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the Css profile that is for some of the more really expensive schools, some of the more expensive private schools?
Yeah, I could speak generally about it. Generally, because I haven't worked at a school that uses the Css profile. But yes, some schools do opt into using the Css profile. What that is it's going to be a supplemental application. So it's kind of an application in addition to the Fafsa or Dream Act, in which the colleges, they choose to take a closer look at your finances or a closer look at things like your home equity, or really at just what you're able to realistically pay. And schools, they choose to do this in order to confirm. The idea is that they're just trying to confirm what institutional money, what institutional grants or scholarships they want to make available to you. So the Css profile, it is going to be separate from the Fafsa and Dream Act, and you tend to only see this used at selective private schools. But once again, the main purpose, the goal is to just really verify a student's, parents, their family's finances, their ability to pay before offering their institutional grant money. But it's worth noting that through the Css profile, schools could choose to actually look at your tax return or some of your asset information. So that's why it's just very important as you're working through your Fafsa or Dream Act, answer everything as accurately as possible, right? You don't want to make a mistake and think that you're getting a lot more money only to then find out, oh, that error actually really changes my eligibility. And maybe that's found once the school through the Css profile looks at your tax return, etc. So I hope that's helpful. But yes, just keep in mind with that Css profile, schools will have their own deadlines, their own particular requirements or documents or forms that they want to take a look at. Okay, so at this point, I'll transition to looking at the questions that have been submitted through the chat box. So I'll go ahead and start from the first question submitted, and we'll work from there. So thank you for those of you submitting those questions. So someone asks, will the slides be shared at the end? I believe this is recorded, and just as last year the event was recorded and made available and now lives in perpetuity on the internet, I'm sure that will occur to this event. So you should have access to those slides from that recording. Oh yeah, I see that was answered. Thank you, Mrs. Hoyos. So we'll get to the next question.
Some of those, I think Mr. McDill answered.
Oh, perfect. Good.
Some of these questions that we have. So I think we can start from this couple new questions that we have at the end, because Mr. McDill was kind of answering as we went. So
I see.
If that something wasn't answered, please submit your question again. But we have, do we have to report both parents' income or only one if they're filing separate taxes? Yes,
thank you for that question, and thank you, Mrs. Hoyos, for the direction there. Yes, we'll take new questions then. So please submit those new questions. All right, so yes, so does one have to report both parents' income or only one if they file separate taxes? So this is going to depend on what you report as your parent's marital status. So remember, students, if you are required to provide parent information, then you are going to see a question asking, what is your parent's marital status? Parent for the Fafsa and Dream Act is your biological or adoptive parent. And so you have to consider, are my parents legally married? Or if they're not legally married, but they're living together, then you still have to report both of their information. So yes, if your parents are legally married, or if they're not married but living together, you do have to report both of their information in terms of income and tax information, even if they filed separately. And that's always a really fun exercise, trying to look at separate taxes and add those together. If your parents are not married and they're not living together, remember, you have to consider which parent have I lived with the most over the last year, and then it's only that one parent's information on there. If that parent remarried, then step parent information is included. So I hope that helps answer that question. Next question was, if both parents don't have a social security number, can you still apply for Fafsa if you have one? Absolutely. In order to apply for the Fafsa, a student has to have an active social security number. But if you as the student, if your parent or both parents don't have a social security number, you absolutely can still apply through the Fafsa or the Dream Act application. If you would just report all zeros as your parent's social security number, and I've entered that into the chat box just kind of as a visual example, right? So if your parent doesn't have a social, just enter all zeros. If your parent has an ITIN, an individual tax identification number, that's something used for tax purposes, don't enter the ITIN, just enter all zeros, and you're still able to submit your application. So thank you for the next question that was submitted. So is the California Dream Act application only applicable for students that are not qualified for Fafsa, or is this for everyone? Yeah, so great question. The intention of the Dream Act application is to target those students who do not qualify for Fafsa. So those students who are not US citizens or who are not eligible non-citizens, for example, those who are not permanent residents, who don't have a refugee or asylee status, who otherwise don't meet that eligible non-citizenship status. So yeah, Dream Act would be for those students who are undocumented, don't have a valid or expired DACA, who are meeting what's called AB 540 requirements. The next question is, when should junior students apply for Fafsa? Before this March 2nd or next year? Yeah, so junior students, by all means, can apply for the Fafsa for the Dream Act. You're not going to break anything. You won't make anyone upset. The application that's going to open up October 1st of this year is the 2022-23 application. That application is intended for the 2022-23 school year. Most colleges begin their 2022-23 school year fall 2022, and that will include all semesters, all terms from fall 2022 through summer 2023. So in theory, if a high school junior might be in college summer of 2023, then you might still want to complete it just in case. If you just want to complete it to see how it is, to go through the motions, you can complete it. You're more than welcome to. Like I said, you're not going to break anything. You're not going to be signed up for a loan. You can't get financial aid money unless you're admitted and enrolled in a college and have graduated high school. So I hope that helps answer the question. But yeah, it wouldn't hurt if you at least want to get an idea what it looks like, and if you want to see what your EFC score might be as well. The next question submitted asks, is there a deadline of when we have to accept a financial aid offer? Great question. In some ways, this depends. So we're going to work through some different types of financial aid here. So is there a deadline of when you have to accept federal financial aid money? Not necessarily. For federal grants, that money is entitlement money. So if you qualify, then that's yours. You're accepted for it. There's no deadline to accept that federal grant money. For federal loans, yeah, there could be some interesting rules and requirements that affect how late you can accept it and still receive that loan money. But usually that deadline is the last day that you're enrolled in classes in college, so schools aren't going to have a deadline where you have to accept the loan before you start classes. I'd be very, very, very surprised if that's the case. Some schools require that students accept federal work study money, so they might want students to take action, such as applying for jobs or getting that job for federal work study money, so there could be a deadline for that. For state grant options, such as the Cal Grant, the Middle Class Scholarship, that is entitlement money. So if you qualify, there's really not going to be a deadline in terms of accepting that money. If you're considering a Cal State school or a UC school, they have institutional money, but these are state schools and they do have very, very specific deadlines. I have a colleague who just came from the Cal State school, and March 2nd was a very important deadline for state university grants. So that's where deadlines are very important. And schools, institutions, they might have their own, remember, financial aid can be institutional money that the schools control, and they could have a policy where they want you to accept that institutional money or take steps for that institutional money by a certain deadline. So that could apply. So I hope that helps. I know that that's kind of convoluted. There's a lot of ifs and thens and this one and that one, but that's just kind of how it is sometimes in financial aid. The next question asks, when is the best time to apply for financial aid? Before submitting college applications or until after decisions have come out? Yeah, I would say in my professional experience, applying as early as possible is best. So apply as early as possible, include as many schools as possible. I can't think of a negative consequence to applying as early as possible. Several years ago, like five or more years ago, schools can actually see what other schools were included, so they could see, hey, were we the #1 school? Were we 8? Are these other schools that are being included? But that's since been removed. The federal government didn't like how that affected admissions decisions. So schools can't even see what other options there are, what other colleges are included. So yeah, I really can't think of a negative consequence to applying as early as possible. So I would recommend just that. Apply as early as you can, as early as you can. The next question is asking, we are self-employed due to COVID and our business suffered huge losses. Our adjusted gross income is negative. How does this impact FAFSA? Yeah, great question. You can still complete the FAFSA application. So you filed taxes, and if this is from 2020, you can still report that even if your adjusted gross income was negative. You'll see on the FAFSA will tell you if you're not allowed to report a negative value. For example, there's a question that you're probably going to have to respond about, did parents earn money from working? And so yes, if you're self-employed, you have to look at Schedule 1. I think it's line 6 for business income. Don't report a negative amount for that. So for income earned from work, you're just reporting 0. You're not reporting a negative number. But for your adjusted gross income, you can report a negative amount. That's fine. You can still complete the FAFSA. Another question was submitted. I made a mistake and submitted the FAFSA for 2021-22. Should I contact FAFSA, the FAFSA people to cancel that submission, or will we be able to revise for 2022-23? Yeah, great question. As I mentioned earlier, for the high school junior that might want to go through the process, because it's an exciting process. You're not going to break anything. By applying early, you're not breaking anything. There's no need to contact FAFSA people to cancel that application. So yeah, you can just simply reapply for 2022-23, simply reapply, and colleges are going to use that application to confirm your eligibility. The next question, and I hope I'm not skipping any questions. It's a little interesting to work through the chat box with all these questions.
No, you're not. You're not skipping.
Good, thank you. Someone's got to keep me on track here. All right, so the next question: would you advise families to And I'm getting some of these questions as a direct message. If other panelists are getting direct questions, feel free to ask those away, because I won't see them if they're direct to you. This direct message asks or states, would you advise families to apply for the FAFSA as close to October 1st as possible, since colleges start evaluating financial aid offers before the actual March 2nd deadline? Yes. Major yes, emphatic yes, apply as early as you can. As mentioned, I can't think of a negative consequence to applying as early as you can. The next question, when is your office open for supporting filling these applications out? Thank you for that question. As I mentioned, we're happy to serve as a resource, not only to our students, but to the surrounding community. So absolutely, you can work with us. We're not gonna, ask you questions and interrogate you like, hey, are you actually a student here? I do encourage you though, attend our Cash for College event. I mean, it's really a great event. We go through the entire FAFSA, and we have a separate DREAM Act application. We have a live Q&A event. It's a great shindig and ordeal. But if that doesn't work out for you, doesn't work out for your schedule, then you can always contact us. I had our website up earlier, but I'll leave it in the chat box for everyone. So if you go to our website, mountsac.edu/financial aid, you'll see our current office hours, our contact information, email address, phone number. So you can always call us. We're more than happy to help you. Believe me, we are well staffed with phones. You're not waiting as long to talk to us as you will at other schools. I've heard plenty of horror stories, and I know people from other schools. Like, we are available here. So take advantage of that, give us a call. Or if you want to stop by in person, we are open for on-campus support. And you'll see our current office hours right now, 8 in the morning till 7 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and 8 to 4:30 on Friday. So feel free to take advantage of our services. And let me find the next question. When I submitted our website link, I lost my place. So one moment. Thank you for bearing with me.
I see the next question being, does a student need to report their part-time job income?
Oh, great. Thank you. Yes, my apologies if you heard me guzzling down water there. That's always nice. Okay, so does a student need to report their part-time income? All right, so that depends. And hey, I inspired someone else to drink water. I love it. So this answer can depend, and I'll explain. So remember, on the financial aid application, on the FAFSA or DREAM Act, the income that is asked for 2022-23 is income from 2020. So students, you have to consider, did you work in 2020? If you didn't work at all, then you're just going to report 0 and move on. But if you did have any income, even if it's a part-time job, if you had any income, then you have to, from 2020, then you will have to report that income. However, there are some students who, based on their parents' finances, do not have to report their income. So if based on your parents' financial circumstances, you qualify for a more simplified application, then your income is not a factor. So yeah, it's kind of going to depend. As you're working on the FAFSA or DREAM Act, if you have to report parent information, then the parent income questions are first before you have to answer your own student income questions. So once again, you might not have to report it because your parents' specific financial situation, but if you see those questions come up, if you see that question, hey student, how much income did you earn from 2020? Then you have to report that income. So the next question asks, can you still change your schools on the FAFSA after it has been submitted? Absolutely. Absolutely. When you first submit the FAFSA, you have to wait about 2 to 3 days for this to process through their system. Once that application processes, you get a nice generic automated email. And at that point, you can re-log in. You can re-log into your FAFSA or DREAM Act for that matter, and add other schools, remove schools, add others, right? So yeah, absolutely, you can always change the schools. So the next question, or or statement, your expected family contribution will be 0, which is good for financial aid purposes. Yeah, so remember the expected family contribution, the EFC score, this is a number calculated by the application. This number has a large effect in terms of what money, how much of that money you can get. So the lower the number, the better for financial aid purposes. The lower the number, the greater financial need you are determined as having. A score of 0 means that you have the maximum financial need possible. That's the lowest score. So for financial aid purposes and eligibility, yes, a 0 is good. And whether or not you qualify for a 0, that's just going to depend on what's on your FAFSA or DREAM Act application. So the next question is, will the Cash for College be meant for the students going to Mount SAC only? No, our Cash for College event is open not only to our Mount SAC students, but to graduating high school seniors. We promote this event aggressively, maybe even too aggressively. You might get sick of it if you start seeing posters at your high school or, letters in the mail. We won't come knocking at your door. That's kind of creepy, but you will see plenty of promotion. So yes, graduating high school seniors are welcome to our event. Mount SAC students are welcome. There's a lot of publicity to this event, so we even get students from other colleges that show up because they want to take advantage of it. So yeah, it's open. As mentioned, our registration is available. You can find the registration info on our website. You'll get flyers shortly that are working their way to Walnut High School. So please join us. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor, bring everyone, bring your family. Virtually, of course. Yes, virtually. All right. The next question: if a student received a W-2 for $1,500 and did not have to file a tax return, does that $1,500 need to get reported to FAFSA? Yes, and thank you for that question. Yeah, so even in circumstances where someone, whether it's the student or the parent, does not file taxes and is not required to file taxes, but earned income from working, they would still report that income from their employment. In this case, right, you're an employee and your employer provides you a W-2. If you did have a 2020 W-2 submitted to you, then you will need to report that as income from working, even if you didn't file taxes. Yes, so thank you for the question. So at this time, there aren't any other questions. We're scheduled till 8, so I'm happy to linger around. I'm sure some of you are thinking and going deep into the recesses of your mind in terms of what you want to ask or what you feel comfortable asking. You can always direct message me if maybe you feel like something's a little private, or if you want to stay anonymous, you can direct message me and I'll just read out your question. You can try to stump me. I'm always down for stump the financial aid person. That's always a fun game. You can always ask. I love talking Pell Grant. So Pell Grant's kind of a weird esoteric thing. So if you want to ask Pell Grant questions, I invite you to ask those. Yes, thank you. Someone asked about the Blue and Gold program for UC. Sadly, I am of no use to you for Blue and Gold information. I have not worked at the UC school system. But what I do know, I know a couple of things at least. For one, you could do what I do for a lot of things and search, right? Use Google or ask Jeeves. I don't know what search engines are out there, but yeah, you can believe me, the information's out there. I know for UC,
can I jump in?
Sure.
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience with the Blue and Gold program.
Good.
I'm not exactly sure what the income limits are right now, but in the past, it's been if you have an adjusted gross income of $80,000 or less, then the state of California will pay your tuition and fees to a UC. So it's really a phenomenal program if you're in that income range. The income ranges may have been raised. I'm not sure exact number, but it's 85,000 or less adjusted gross that you can actually get your tuition and fees paid at the UC.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, that's more or less kind of the general idea that I had about it. Of course, right, it's a program offered through the UC. This is institutional grant money. So of course, just keep in mind that the school will determine eligibility and will have their unique requirements. But yeah, great opportunity to help defray some of the costs, right, of tuition, of those expenses there. But yeah, as I would, and of course, right, thank you for that input. But of course, you can look it up. I know that the UC, I've seen it before on the UC website. I just, I didn't memorize it all, but I have kind of like perused through that information. So you can look at that, or oh, I said I know two things. I guess I only know one thing, because that's the only, I just remember I was going to talk about searching for it. So yes, the Blue and Gold program, great opportunity. Make sure to look at a UC Schools website for that information. So there was another question submitted asking, is there a cutoff income for those who are not eligible for financial aid? Yeah, so in some ways, this is a tricky question. A tricky question because technically speaking, your eligibility is not solely based on the income information, on the income data on the application. Another big factor is your household size, the number in college, whether or not you're reporting assets on there. So that could have an interesting influence in terms of how much your income really factors into your overall eligibility. So I know that seems like I'm skirting the issue like a cop-out, but yeah, I mean, I've seen families where they're making $200,000, but there's a lot of household members, whether it's children or other people they're supporting, or there's a lot of people going to college, and they, as a result, they still qualify for some grant money, for need-based money. Remember too, colleges, institutions have their own institutional money, their institutional grants and scholarships. I worked at a private college where even if the family was upwards $500,000, that student could still qualify for some money just based on the unique analysis at that school and the scholarships and the grants available. Some scholarships and grants from the schools won't even look at income. It's just based on your high school academic achievement, or it's based on how much that music department really wants you, or the athletic team, right? All of that other stuff. So income, have an exact cutoff doesn't quite exist. What I will share is that there is a cutoff for the Cal Grant program. And so I'll share that right now. I'll stop sharing my screen briefly just so I can get that information. But I want to reward those of you who are still here. So I'll share with you the Cal Grant income and asset ceilings. So there are ceilings, there are limits to your income, to the assets reported on your application, and whether or not you qualify for the state Cal Grant program. So I'll provide you the link to that PDF. And this is public information. It's not super secret and, covered in a vault or something like that. All right. So I'm leaving that in the chat box for all of you to access. But this could give you an idea in terms of your potential eligibility for the Cal Grant program. So once again, this is specific to Cal Grant, but there are some ceilings involved, some limitations in terms of your income and the assets reported on your application. And so we'll go to the, I believe there was another question submitted. 1 second while I, while we have a nice graphic, a nice slideshow to look at too, right? A nice friendly smile. So I think there was another question submitted.
Yes, it says, do we have to report 401k and IRA on FAFSA?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. You don't have to report the value of those accounts. If you received payments, distributions from those accounts, then you might have to report them. If they appear on your tax return, then yes. If you got taxed on them, then they ultimately appear on your adjusted gross income. If they were not taxed, you would see that on your tax return, and you would report that as untaxed income on your FAFSA or DREAM Act. And the questions will kind of guide you about where to look on your tax return. Some of you might have had a situation where this is a rollover, and so it appears on your taxes, but it's all untaxed. If some of that or all of it is a rollover, then make sure that you report such on the Fafsa or Dream Act. Okay, so just want to mention that too. Sometimes we get that. So if that applies to you, if you had a rollover situation in 2020, then just be careful about how you're reporting that on your Fafsa or Dream Act. You don't want to make a mistake because that could negatively affect you in terms of your financial aid eligibility. Another question was submitted. Do assets such as real estate or cash affect eligibility for financial aid? So once again, similar to that question about an income cutoff, this is a little hard to answer and it's a little related. For example, some students and families, based on their parents' financial circumstances, based on the financial information reported, will qualify for a simplified Fafsa, a simplified Dream Act, in which you don't have to report asset information. Even if you do have all of these amazing assets, you might not need to report it. So that could always apply to your situation. If you have to report asset information, if the parent has to report asset information, you will see a question which reads, does the value of your parent's assets exceed X amount? So the question wants to know, is the value of your parents' assets more than whatever amount you see? That amount could be different, okay? But at that point, you're answering yes or no. If the value of the parent assets, if it's below that amount, then don't worry about it. You don't have to report your information. Part of the calculation has what's called an asset protection allowance. So if the value of your assets is below that amount, so let's say, for example, you don't have investments, you don't own properties, it's just cash or gold, checking and savings account. But if the value of that is only $2,000 and the question asks, hey, as of today, does the value of your assets exceed $4,000? You just say no, and you don't have to report your asset information. And even if you're reporting asset information, once again, there are other factors like the income, the household size, etc., that affect your eligibility. So it's really hard to say how much your assets truly will affect it. So I hope that helps. Once again, I fully understand if it seems like I'm copping out and not answering the question directly, but I hope that makes sense. Next question submitted. If a student will be receiving an academic scholarship, will that have any impact on Fafsa? Potentially, but it's very, very rare. Especially when I worked at a private college, it was the case that some students really qualified for a lot of amazing academic scholarships, whether through the school or outside scholarships, right? It's like there's a Bill Gates scholarship. I'm like blanking out on the foundation on the name of that scholarship, but there's like some pretty big time scholarships out there, right? And it's amazing if you can get those. But it's still very rare that will have a negative effect on your eligibility. If you're applying through the Fafsa, and if you qualify for Pell Grant, then you're entitled to that Pell Grant. Your Pell Grant can't get reduced based on scholarship information. Where you depending on how much scholarships you're getting. I mean, we're talking like 20,000 or more in scholarships, and that might affect whether or not you're getting other need-based, other free types of grants like that Cal Grant, or maybe need-based awards from the school. But just to put it into perspective, at that point, if you're getting a lot of scholarships, then likely your costs are already getting paid for at that point. So it's just, like I said, it's very, very rare that has a negative effect in terms of your eligibility. So yeah, I hope that helps. But that's definitely something to explore closely with the school that you end up going to. As you look at their offer, you can then see more or less how much free money you're getting. And if you're going to qualify for a lot more scholarship money, you can have that conversation with the school. How might this affect my eligibility for these other grants? As mentioned, most of the time there's not a negative consequence, but often it's going to be up to each school in terms of how that's going to affect things. Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for the question. So those were all the questions submitted. We are scheduled till 8 o'clock. We still have plenty of people here, so thank you. Those of you joining us, or those of you multitasking and doing other things, eating dinner. Wonder how the Buccaneers and Cowboys are doing. I know that's going on. Yes, so if you have other questions, please feel free to submit those. I'm more than happy to continue lingering and waiting for other questions as they come up. Thank you. Thank you so much for someone who shared the score. All right, so we got a nail biter. Close game. That made my day. Thank you for that. And so I'll keep waiting to see if other questions are submitted. I'm also in my mind trying to think through some of the questions that tend to come up. I mean, you all have already asked a lot of great questions. So thank you for those who have submitted questions. What I do want to share, for just kind of as like as a takeaway, as a way to kind of have expectations going forward, and we're really talking about a few years from now. But just so at least you've heard it now, before all the internet articles and all the media outlets start publishing things and talking about things, and sometimes things start to sound very confusing. But there was actually recent legislation passed, which is really going to change how the financial aid application looks and how it's experienced. So starting the 2024-25 year, right? So yeah, we're talking about that far in advance, but the 2024-25 application, that's going to look very different. There's going to be direct data sharing between the IRS and the Department of Education, so the FAFSA. So that's really going to help streamline the application. You won't have to worry about responding to the tax and income, because sometimes that's complicated, especially if we're not used to looking at those forms. But at least for that year, 2024-25, there's that automatic data sharing, so you won't really have to answer those tax questions. Eligibility for Pell Grant is likely going to be expanded. It's not going to be strictly based on that EFC score. It's going to be something called a student aid index number, and it's going to be very different. So I share that because you're going to experience applying for financial aid and all the terminology upcoming for this 2022-23 school year, for the following school year, but potentially when the student, or you as the student, when you're a junior in college for 2024-25, then it's going to look very different. Okay, so I'm just trying to give you a heads up about that. And thank you. Someone shared the link to the Blue and Gold opportunity program. Yes, so that's going to be coming from the source, right? That's the UC website, and you'll get to learn about the Blue and Gold opportunity program. Okay, yeah, there you go. Someone went for it. They took the bait and they asked about Cal Grant information. Yeah, so Cal Grant is one of those programs where there's a whole slew of rules and eligibility requirements. And part of that is why there are people like me that stay employed, because there's all these convoluted rules. But yes, with Cal Grant, as we learned, this is a state grant opportunity. And as you might learn, there are different types of Cal Grant. There's Cal Grant A, there's Cal Grant B, and there's Cal Grant C. Each of these Cal Grants is technically different. We'll talk about how they are different. In order to qualify for Cal Grant, one of the important factors in terms of how you qualify is where the student is at in their educational journey, in their academic journey. There's a way to qualify for Cal Grant as a graduating high school senior. All right, so if you're graduating from high school, that's ideally the easiest way to qualify and to enter into the Cal Grant program. If that doesn't happen for whatever reason, for various reasons, then there's a way to qualify for Cal Grant as a transfer student. If you go to a California community college, if you then transfer to a school in California to get your bachelor's degree, for example, then you could qualify for Pell Grant as a transfer student. If none of those apply, if you don't qualify because you're coming out right out of high school or transferring, then there's a way to get Pell Grant known as the competitive Pell Grant, and that's going to be based on a very complex scoring system in which CSAC, the California Student Aid Commission, they're going to measure your measure your disadvantages based on economic factors or other factors captured on your application. And there are limited Pell Grant awards for these competitive offers, and you might qualify, but it is very tough. There are limited awards. Now, I bring all of that up just so that you're kind of generally aware that qualifying for Pell Grant, once again, hopefully you qualify this year as you're a graduating high school senior, but if that doesn't happen, likely it will happen if you transfer, or maybe if you get it through that competitive award. The type of Pell Grant you get is either a Pell Grant A, or a Pell Grant B, or a Pell Grant C. Those of you who are graduating high school, right? If you're going to be considered for Pell Grant graduating high school, then you can qualify for Pell Grant A if your grade point average from high school is reported as a 3.0 or higher, and if your income is within that income ceiling. I shared with you that document. There's an income and asset ceiling for Pell Grant A. So typically, those who get Pell Grant A are those who have higher income, but there is a higher grade point average requirement of 3.0, and you need to meet those income ceilings. If you're the graduating high school senior being considered for Pell Grant, in order to qualify for Pell Grant B, your grade point average has to be at least a 2.0 or higher, but your income has to be much lower. The income ceiling for Pell Grant B is much lower. Those students who qualify for Pell Grant B will actually have two components to their award. They have a component that helps towards tuition, and there's a component that helps toward books and school supplies. It's like a stipend. Okay, so that's one major difference. Pell Grant A is only available at a school that goes towards a bachelor's degree. So you can't get this at the community colleges. And Pell Grant A effectively at a UC and Cal State pays for tuition. At a private school, Pell Grant A pays for a portion. It's around $9,000, but it's not going to pay for all of your tuition. Pell Grant B has that same tuition component, but there's that little stipend, that little extra component of books and school supplies. I believe it's around $1,600 at every school. At the community college, $1,600. I'm pretty sure that's standard at other schools. For Pell Grant C, this type of Pell Grant is very different. This Pell Grant is targeted for students who are completing very specific vocational or occupational programs. And you're usually only finding that at a community college. So it's kind of very different. It's really targeting those students, like I said, who are taking vocational occupational programs, likely at a community college. It's not too common that this is available at the UC or Cal State or private schools. So that's more or less the differences. I hope that kind of helps just kind of as a general overview. I do want to share, if hopefully you have an Instagram. If you do, go to our Instagram account. I'll leave our Instagram handle, MountSAC_FA. We have posts. We have 3 posts that talk about Pell Grant, getting Pell Grant as a high school student, transfer, and then the competitive. And in those posts, we really outline everything thoroughly, and we link you to the website, the California Student Aid Commission website. That's the state organization which manages Pell Grant, but you can see exactly all those rules. So if you really just want to go to the source and look at all of that information, you'll find that there, and that's going to be very, very useful for you. I do want to share too, just while on the topic of Pell Grant, with my experience, especially at the private school, but this comes up too here at Mount SAC. Oftentimes, students aren't aware that they qualify for Pell Grant, or students have to complete some additional steps in order to get their Pell Grant. So please try to get in the habit of going to the following website. So what I've sent to you all is the California Student Aid Commission website, known as Web Grants for Students. All students are encouraged to create an account through this website, but this is how you manage your Cal Grant status. So usually students have to complete some steps in order to get their Cal Grant. So try to develop that habit. After you apply for financial aid, if you're eligible for Cal Grant, you're going to get a notice. CSAC is really good about emailing you or sending you a letter, but you can always go to this website and see if you qualify. And this is going to be a good resource for you. So just try to make that a habit check every year to see if you qualify, and confirm if there's anything on your to-do list.
Well, this was really, really great, Mr. Sanchez. We just really appreciate all of the great information that you've shared with us. I just wanted to let everybody know that on classof2022.net, the links that you shared with us, we will put there right under the financial aid information. The frequently asked questions that you answered so thoroughly will also be there, and also the Cal Grant information that you covered will also be there, as well as resources so that you can connect to the source, just as Mr. Sanchez said.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you so much. It's been my joy and pleasure to join you all today and cover all of this valuable information. So of course, thank you once again, Walnut High School staff, for making this available. Thank you, students, parents, guardians, for joining. I hope it was a valuable use of your time and that you walk away with a lot of valuable and useful information.